Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody.
We're not in a day where we need a moment. We're in a day where we have to build a movement that intersects and brings us all together. We don't know yet what would happen if we had in 30 to 40 states a moral poor people's campaign with people in state capitals over an extended period of time. But I think we ought to find out.
Because everybody's got a right to live.
Now, I'm going to ask Liz to come up. Our first person I want to introduce, and she'll take the rest of them, is my dear friend, Bishop Tonyia Rawls. And interestingly today, if people know she's here, they might think she's going to talk about one thing. But she is black, she's a woman, she's LGBT, gay. And we often talk about what all that means and how important it is at times for her to say, yeah, this, you may think this is the issue, but I understand how this my life is connected to the other. So today, she's going to lift up for us the issue of voting rights from a report by Ari Berman. He couldn't be here today, but he sent his report. But why, if you're going to have a poor people's campaign to deal with race and do an audit on race, poverty, and class, you cannot ignore the impact of voting rights on the issue of poverty and race. You just can't. And she's going to share some things with you today that I hope will make us say, oh, no, everybody's got a right to live. We have to do this. So my good friend, Bishop Rawls, would you come? She's my sister. I've been in her church, she's been in mine, and come on up and make her presentation at this time. We give her a big hand. All the way, flew up from North Carolina. She's got to fly back. You have to be in church in the morning? Yeah, she's got to preach in the morning. I've got to preach in the morning because we're active pastors. So that's the other thing about it. We have to live with this stuff because we pastor people. So come on.
Freedom is a wonderful thing. I am really honored to be here today. One of the things that Dr. Barber had referenced earlier, and I think it does warrant noting, our relationship actually began in a LGBTQ fight. It began when Amendment 1, and actually even before that, we were fighting on many intersectional issues. But the relationship really deepened when we began this fight around the fact that equal protection under the law was really a right and not an option. And so regardless of where folk landed on the issues of LGBTQ people of faith and people in general, nonetheless, everyone's entitled to equal protection under the law. What we also realized is, while I may be married and in a same gender loving relationship, I'm always also going to be black. And I'm also always going to be the product of poor folk. And I am also always going to be a woman, and I happen to be a cisgender woman. And all of these other things that I am, it shortchanges me and the world when I don't bring all those selves to the fore. And so one of the things that he and I, in our troublemaking, have gotten in the habit of doing is showing up places where he talks about all the gay stuff and I talk about all the other stuff. Just to mess with people, and here is Dr. Barber talking about trans people, The reason we have done that, however, is quite intentional. It is intentional because one of the things that my organization, the Freedom Center for Social Justice, is committed to is culture shift. And this notion of culture shift is a conversation that we don't tend to have often, but I believe, especially in thinking about the work that Dr. Forbes and Dr. Barber and others are pulling together now, is something that will be the sustainable path. A program or a campaign is a thing. It has a start and it has a finish. However, when you accomplish culture shifts, That is something that is sustainable throughout generations. And what we have vested in is this notion of what does it look like? And there's no better testing ground than coming from North Carolina. God bless North Carolina. Do y'all pray for us? Do you pray for us? Pray for us. God bless us. Let's God bless our governor's our ex-governor's heart and all them people. Let's God bless them. But let me tell you something about this, and I'm going to get right to the voting rights piece because this all ties in together. When it was time for us to fight about voter disenfranchisement, we already had a movement. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I speak around the country about Southern organizing. Like, that's a term now, intersectionality and Southern organizing. The truth around Southern organizing is quite simple. We don't have the luxury of splitting up. It's literally that simple. We don't have the luxury of saying, so black folk are gonna organize over here, and then the white folk are gonna organize, and then we're gonna have the Jews over here, and the Muslims and Sikhs over here. What we own is we have common enemies. And while I don't agree with everything everybody in the coalition stands for, we agree on enough that we can find that band. So I want to talk here about voter disenfranchisement, which if you've read this recent report, there was a report that talked about the fact that right now, in its current state, North Carolina's democracy is likened to Cuba. And actually, we're below many other parts of the world in terms of where our democracy stands. So in essence, our democracy is a mockery. And when you think about a state that has so much going on in terms of both some of the most amazing positive things and challenging things, voting is at the center of everything that's happening there. Why is all of this relevant to you all? Because North Carolina is a testing ground. And if you think what's happening there isn't about you, then you miss the whole picture. North Carolina just doesn't have the obstructions in the way. We had a conservative governor, a conservative Senate, a conservative House, and a conservative-leaning court. It ain't nowhere to go in North Carolina, okay? And because of that, there was nothing to kind of stop the push of some of the most egregious things that people had seen in recent history. And they could do it with impunity. So when it was time for us to start addressing the upcoming presidential election, all hell broke loose. Because this was the opportunity to say, what kind of strategies, what kind of policies, what kind of laws can we put in place that would impact the outcome of elections? As Dr. Barber referenced earlier, when you think about your power, clearly we were doing something right in North Carolina because they truly felt the need to pull everything out to fight against the vote. The thing that's different, and I have to commend them on this, about some of our opponents, is their successful ability to look at the long game. It's a long game strategy. Attacking voting rights was a long game strategy. That was not like somebody woke up 2 years ago and said, let me think about that. Even the framing of language like the religious right, all of that was done owning, you know what, we're gonna do some wrong stuff, but let's call ourselves right. So just the very language itself, right? Calling oneself evangelical, right? So evangelical was code for what? White conservative Christians, okay? I love what, again, my partner in crime, Dr. Barber, he'll walk up and look at every bit a black country preacher and then say, guess what, I'm an evangelical. And people look like, he's an evangelical? My God, he's an evangelical. As if it couldn't possibly be that here this black man, black Baptist preacher, claims evangelicalism. And what we know is these strategies have worked. Because what we do is we reject the notion that we have to be separated in our language, we have to be separated in how we walk, talk, and owning that this is not partisan. So I have sisters and brothers who vote Republican and understand the right and power of citizens to have full justice. I stated earlier about King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, saying that there is nothing new under the sun. And nowhere is that more true than in the centuries-old battles between good and evil, love and fear, justice and inequality. That is important to note in times like these where many feel we are doomed. I have never seen so many young people. And if you want to see a heartbreaking thing, Maya Angelou said, if you want to see a real travesty, look at a young person who's lost hope. Because in the absence of hope, life is doomed. And so when I look in the eyes of many of our young millennials, and I see this sense of hope and this sense of a loss of confidence in our very democracy, for those who are not concerned, you most definitely should be. I stand before you to say also that as opposed to you hearing American revolutionary Paul Revere's words, which actually Paul Revere didn't say it, but for the sake of this, I'll say it, okay? The British are coming, the British are coming. I want to say that the conservative radical right has come. And that in that, we have faced a new reality. But there is a new reality in America. And the thing that frightens me and others in reference to this ominous enemy is that their most concern is around a very simple principle, and that is the vote. You can take everything else and condense it down to the vote. Look at how attacks fall. Attacks fall in ways that impact what? People's voting rights, people's ability to change the structures within Senate, within houses of representation, within city government. This is the long game thinking, okay? When they knew, when President Obama had won the presidential election, do you know what many of the Conservative Party did? They didn't go after big offices. You know what they went for? They went for small offices. They went for county governor, they went for commissioners, they went for House representatives, and this is the other thing that's important, and they went for judges. Well, why do you think that was important? Why were those votes important? Because midterm elections, many times what happens is we don't turn up. They seem that this is kind of, it's the middle of the midterm election, it's after the presidential election. We don't really have to worry about that. But guess what that vote did? Across America, people ignoring that vote, just caught up and heady in reference to the politics of the day, because Obama had won, we lost massive, massive abilities in reference to the way that houses were changed. The vote is American democracy's oxygen, as I had stated earlier. And I want to just share, before I take my seat, a couple of things that happened that was massive. When the pre-clearance segment of the Voting Rights Act was removed, this pre-clearance segment was a segment that said you cannot, if you are one of the 14 southern states, primarily southern states, that have historically done illegal things around race as related to voter disenfranchisement. You can't change any law until you get clearance from the federal government. Within 24 hours after that was voted down, North Carolina began a process, along with other states, of putting in some of the most draconian anti-voter laws ever seen in recent history. And now, as we fast forward, we have seen that in North Carolina, we now have a situation where the law that was passed in North Carolina was so egregious in terms of redistricting, is actually why the state was lost. And again, it was masterful, but they literally surgically drew racial lines in terms of gerrymandering so that it was impossible for Republican candidates to lose. And they boxed black candidates in ways that, yeah, we'll give you that particular county, but we're gonna get all the rest of this. And because it was so egregious, the court was able to find that they could not even allow our current elections to stand. So we're actually gonna have another election in 2017 because the first one we had this year was so illegal. So instead of 2 terms, candidates will get 1 term. I'm sharing this to say to you all that when thinking about places like Ohio, like Wisconsin, like North Carolina, these are not isolated situations. And attacks on our voting rights is just beginning. And I want to encourage you, this coming election cycle in particular, mobilize your people now. Please do not wait until the months before the election. You have to start now to understand that the vote is the thing that's going to make the difference. Start at the lowest levels. Just think about who you're electing into school boards, who you're electing into county commissions, who you're electing into your city council. Wherever you can do it, change to candidates that are going to go and support us. I want to give you this one last statistic. And this stat says that in Wisconsin, Donald Trump won by a mere 27,000 votes. Now, you know Wisconsin was a swing state. However, 300,000 registered voters could not vote in Wisconsin because of voter ID laws. Can I say that number again? 300,000 people could not vote for the President of the United States, as Ari Berman had laid out in his wonderful article, because voter ID laws had changed. In North Carolina, they wound up shutting down 117 different precincts, so that you only had in some counties 1 place that people could vote. So what I want to say is this: the vote matters. And turn to your neighbor, yes, I am a preacher. Turn to your neighbor and say, the vote is like oxygen, and I'm not ready to suffocate. All right, thank you.
All right, so now we have a little time for questions. We know that we're not going to figure out every problem in the rest of the afternoon, but we do want to have a little time for questions. We have about 10 minutes. And so if folks can address those and, get to the point in terms of, what do we need to do in this moment? All right, back there and then here.
Just to make sure I have the figure, you said 617 polling places?
I want to say it was like 115. I can't find it here in my notes, but it was about 115 places, polling places that were because, again, this is important to note. Whoever the House is, or the party is that's in control, they actually get to control what the voting days are and the length of time the voting gets to happen, in addition to where the polls are going to be. So that strategy was used to actually negatively impact Black voters.
Now, going forward, it's 2017 basically.
Yes.
Census in 2020. Redistricting in 2022. Looking at, that's not even really long game, that's midterm game. What is our strategy going to be, or what does it need to be, so that by 2022 we have effectuated enough change and need to get rid of the language in our community about quote unquote off-year election. There is no such thing.
That's right, that's right.
That we will have restored some measure of actual representation in state legislatures, et cetera, so that 2022 is not a catastrophe?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I want to say is this. Every state is different. Every county is different. Every city is different. Every neighborhood is different in America, okay? I'm always nervous when people give a universal answer to a question like that, only because of some of the complexities connected to it. What I would say is this: we all have to address the issue. I also want to suggest that the fusion politics that we just talked about, and giving that example, and I'm sorry I took up some of the time talking about the example, but the reason that was important to note is because you can't make the kind of change we're referencing now in silos. In order for that kind of change to happen, you actually have to have a pretty ubiquitous movement, and one that is able to hit all levels of effort. So that's the reason why I went as far as to say even school boards, right? The PTA, you can't go down far enough. Because, no, seriously, because do you know where minds and hearts are actually changed? It's around the dinner table. Yeah. It's in the barbershop. It's in the hairdresser, where people get their information. And unfortunately now it's also on social media, which is not controlled by central information sources. So it's a whole new game. And unless we really begin thinking about that, our president-elect has mastered it. And he has changed the game forever. It is never going to be the same again, right? That you could be a president-elect and bypass the national media for more than a month is unheard of. And he's doing it effectively. And guess what? We talk about everything he says at 3 a.m. in the morning, right? So we all have to figure out how we do this more closely together. Strategize in your local community, talk to the key decision makers, no conversations too small.
All right.
I'd like to hear more about 2017. For what it looks like for us outside of North Carolina looks like Selma did in the 1960s. I think there is you told us we have an election in 2017. When is the election? This is potentially a real opportunity for us to use this as a battleground. Yes. So what's being done and what can we do to ensure that we take advantage of that?
Yeah. Well, it's a great point. And you're in a great position because one of the champions of that is here with us, and Reverend Dr. William Barber. North Carolina also is somewhat unique. We're unique in that we've been working together for many years now across many issues, right? That's important to note because we're able to mobilize that coalition. I will say in 2017, however, we're going to need a lot more help. You only have so many physical bodies. I do want to say this, and I know this is being streamed across the nation and throughout the world. One thing that has always fascinated me is the rare number of mega churches that engage in the movement work. Like seriously, does anybody have mega churches in your community doing work? I mean, that's doing work. That's what I'm saying. No, but is that should be sobering. No, seriously, that should be sobering. It actually is painful to me, and it's painful as a cleric because you're talking about congregations that have tens of thousands of members who are not being mobilized for this kind of work, right? So I want to put out a challenge to mega church pastors and leaders and ask that you find ways of mobilizing your congregations and your sphere of influence to help. That being said, also, the election is being held in November, just like the regular election time. And so there'll be more information put out, but definitely the NAACP of North Carolina is spearheading some things. We're also asking for some support from other communities. I will say, as somebody who does national organizing for the LGBTQ community, in no other place have we had such a presence of queer folk doing organizing, particularly queer young Black and people of color activists. So there's a lot to learn if you're really interested in a complex model. And if you want to know more, I have some cards that I'll put up for those who may want to stay connected to me directly. I think this gentleman had the last question.
Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
So Congresswoman Sewell has introduced a bill called the Voting Rights, it's VRAA. And when the Shelby versus Holder case was passed, the Supreme Court said that, well, they gutted the 1965 Civil Rights Act that many of these people, bled and fought for, but they left it for the Congress to create a new formula. And the question I have is, if we have a bill in Congress that could restore the Voting Rights Act, what would be the strategy to get it passed? And I'm of the belief that we can't do the okie dokie no more. That bill has been sitting in the Congress, and the Republicans will not. I used to work in Congress. They won't let it come to the floor. I think we're going to have to do things a little bit differently, whether we have to maybe do sit-ins in these Republicans' offices, march, but I think we need a state fight, but we have to have a federal strategy as well.
Really good question. Let me tell you, is anybody disturbed by the fact that the protections for vulnerable communities is an act and not a law? That has to be re-upped? Like it has to get re-upped. It's not a law, it's an act that is present at the will of the Congress. And so that being said, I think your question is an excellent one, because at the end of the day, as citizens, and see, this is the interesting thing. I think that one of the most tragic things is to see how someone who has power walk as if they don't. Power is a fascinating thing, right? The power dynamic fascinates me. As a student of history, what power does is, someone like a Donald Trump, his success comes from his ability to project power. It does not mean he has power. I said the ability for him to project power. The real power is and always has been in the hands of the citizens. But if you lead citizens to believe somehow that if we organize, if we pull together, we cannot affect change, then we miss the incredible power that we have been given through the Bill of Rights, through the Constitution, through state-level laws, and the like. So in this current administration and Congress and Senate, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I personally believe that actually this is an amazing opportunity we have, because things are going to get so bad so fast. And I'm not saying this in a Brexit way. Like, we thought Europe was going to fall down when Brexit, happened, or that the world's going to fall apart because Trump was elected. It's actually not going to fall apart. It's going to be fine. But the opportunity that we can have to pull together individuals who might not normally have come together, I think is absolutely amazing. Because what people realize is fundamentally our democracy is under attack. And so if you get that, then we're able to move across lines of difference. Lastly, I want to say this. I have to get over myself on a few areas. I own some of my biases and prejudices, which is why I fell on that love ethic piece. Every year part of why I have to fly out, you can't, if you're a black preacher, you can't miss watch night and Sunday, first Sunday. I can't miss first Sunday and watch night. Yeah, you're gonna miss one or the other, yeah. So, but when you think of this notion of, Lord, I just lost my thought talking about church. Oh yes, my prejudices, thank you. How can I talk about church and prejudice? I'm so prejudiced. The prejudiced bishop. But I want to be honest about this, right? So I have some biases that I have to own if I'm to do this work with integrity, right? What that means is I have to own some of my issues around white privilege. I have to own some of my issues around homophobics. I have to own some of my issues around those who seek to oppress the poor. I have real issues with that, because I'm now called to work with many of those people. You feel me? Turn to your neighbor and say, just get over it. Think about it like castor oil. It's like castor oil. It's like political castor oil. Just take it. It will be better after we do, but it may not taste good, but it is going to be good, because what I know about this fight is we can't do it alone anymore. All right? Thank you.
Everybody's got a right to live, and before this campaign fails, we'll all go down in jail, because everybody's got a right to live.